every reputation or everything you work for, you can almost lose by the next job you take, and so when I say to you, when you ask me what's it like at the Brumbies, it was a job that I wanted to take. It was a job that I thought there was so many similarities for where the South African team was in 2004 to where the Brumbies were when I arrived here this time last year. And they'd come nowhere. They had a mass exodus of their senior players. They had just fired a coach halfway through a season. That's sort of unheard of in Brumby land because they're very loyal people here, and they have this it's a very family orientated area here, and sort of to leave the coach out or fire him. He was a Canberra guy, he grew up here, he went to school here. It sort of left an ugly taste in the community. And saying that is that therefore when I arrived here, it sort of probably wasn't, it's probably never been on a lower ebb than it's ever been, the Brumby brand I'm talking about, when I took over last year. And so when you say what is it that we did, I'd learned lessons from 2004 with the Boks. We had Gio Cronje and Quinton David saga. We had the Kam Staaldraad saga. We had been knocked out in the quarterfinals of the World Cup. I mean, as you would remember, 2003 was probably the lowest the Bok brand had also been. And so when I got here, I just stuck to the things that worked for me with the Boxers. I got here early. I only started literally, and as in my contract, and the season only started in November, December, as in pre-season, and the tournament only kicked off in February. But I got here in July, and I spent about 6 months getting things in place that I thought were going to be massively important for this year. So recruitment, making sure the environment was exciting, making sure the clubhouse was revamped, changing whatever it looked like inside in terms of bringing a bit of history and tradition back. So I got a couple of pictures of the old players there, old players who had achieved, like Gregan and Larkham and Finnegan and Joe Roff and those sort of guys. Went and put some of those pictures up and try to make it a little bit more of a sort of clubhouse where players who walked in there just sensed a sense of aura. And so again, no different to when I took over the Boks. The Boks, I introduced the braiding on the blazers. I brought in the old rugby jerseys, no skin tight jerseys. Not that I'm against skin tight jerseys, but went back to the colorings and of the green and gold jerseys. Made sure that the white sort of cricket jerseys they wore as number ones were important. And so what I'm saying, Jace, is I went back to the things that I knew and brought those things in. So the traditions, the values, the understanding of the legacy that was created before you. I went and asked George Gregan and Larkham to assist me on the coaching staff. Got Eddie Jones, who was a successful Brumbies coach, probably the most successful Brumbies coach, got him to be involved with the group, just as I'd got people involved with the Boks when I was involved with the Boks. Guys like Gert Small, who probably one of the best forwards South Africa ever had. And so, because I had been there and because I had done it and because I had the experience of what it was like to rebuild a franchise and a brand, I just brought those things with me to Australia. And there's no difference. Players who play rugby want to win. Players who play rugby want to be involved in an environment where they can play their best rugby. And we just stuck to those things. So I spent probably the first 6 months off the field, focused off the field. Obviously, it was on-field things with a bit of training, a bit of conditioning, but basically getting the off-field images right. And made sure that everybody who signed up, joined the Brumbies, arrived at the clubhouse, felt proud to be part of the Brumbies, made sure that, things that we could do, that we could control in the rugby program, put into place. We got a full-time chef, got a full-time kitchen now in our clubhouse where the players get fed breakfast and lunch, which is, again, unheard of in terms of sort of rugby teams, not only in Australia, but I'm sure in all parts of the world, where you can get, your own food and you get your own chef, your own supplementation. And yeah, I mean, I think all those things added up have obviously been beneficial because players are happy. I have them all living literally within sort of 2-3 Ks of the clubhouse. Like, we can meet regularly. It's a small little town, so there's no reason why within one phone call no one can be at the clubhouse within 5 minutes. So there's a massive family orientation here, as I said, and gone back to the things that made the Brumbies successful in the past by not only introducing players who were part of it, but going back to the value systems and the sort of cultures that were very strong in Brumby land, in the early 2000s. Standards that are set before you are non-negotiable. When you say what are those things, I mean the things that I sort of stress is that we need to understand there's a history and there's a legacy that are not negotiable. Those are standards that are set before us, and I'm really big on getting them to buy in and understand that part of that comes with a massive responsibility when they play for the Brumbies. And then I think also, as you've mentioned before, it's the whole preparation and planning aspect. Is that I want them to be prepared and plan for every time they play, and that means conditioning wise, mental wise, tactically they've got to be astute as well. So we spend a lot of time on getting them to understand how we want to play, whether they can play like that from a conditioning point of view, and also mentally whether they understand what's needed in terms of getting the best out of them. And I've always said, if it's like going into exam, if you're prepared and you've done your homework, and everything falls into place, there's no reason why you shouldn't get success. And those are things that as I said, that I sort of instilled in the Springboks and try to take to the Boks setup. And obviously they work for us. And I think it's massive for me as a South African who's been there in the best team in the world, and bringing all those lessons to this young group of Brumby boys who aspire to be the best in the world as well. I just made it quite clear. I'm coming here. We're not coming up to make numbers. I want players who want to come to Canberra. I want them to become Wallabies. But more importantly, as a group, we've got an onus upon ourselves to become champions and win as many titles as we can. And that so far so good. We're still top of the Australian conference. And if all things pan out the way that is, we get another crack at playing in the playoffs, which is a massive achievement for a young group like we've got. But I think the lesson that I learned there is that you just got to be honest with the players, and I think the other thing is just stick to what works for you. You get picked to coach, and you got to just keep coaching through those difficult times, and you got to make sure that the coaching you do is as good a coaching. You can't be focusing on what if or the negatives. You got to make sure you're focusing on the positives. But as I said, I think honesty as well. I think the players just need to know that the message is consistent and it's honest all the time. So. They say they're winning close games, they're happy, and obviously when they're winning, they're going to say those things. But when times are tough, you've just got to be honest to yourself, honest to the players. You've got to make sure you believe in those things you still believe in. And from experience, you just have to then put your head down and do the things that worked for you in the first place. I mean, I think often what happens is you start doubting your own ability, and you start questioning the things that you're putting in place. And I think the lesson I learned in 2006, and Ian McIntosh was probably the guy who helped me with that the most. He said, just get back on the field and just get back and coach and forget about what's happening back in South Africa. And that lesson has stuck with me because, if things had to go difficult in the Brumbies, I would just get back on the field and start coaching. And I think players pick that up. I think they pick up the fact that you're confident in your own ability, and that gives them confidence. I think that one of the things that I learned is that you can never know everything about rugby, and it's changing all the time. So you need to stimulate yourself and get people from outside to actually question you or throw ideas at you, because that brings the best out of you. And I think that, as you say, I've probably been fortunate enough to have people around me that I trust, and people that are around me that weren't also uncomfortable in me bringing other people in. We probably got a lot to be thankful for the fact that Ian McIntosh got that job and as I said, was the pioneer for that. And he, in a lot of ways, helped me to understand the intricacies and the sort of detail that goes in behind the scenes of being a coach, coaching a national team like South Africa. And I think John Hart, who was the All Black coach, I spent a lot of time talking to him while I was the coach, and he'd also come off an unsuccessful World Cup campaign. And as I said, maybe didn't always talk rugby to me, but talked a lot to me about lessons in New Zealand, about what it was like for him, who had been assistant coach in '87 and won, and then lost the World Cup in '95. Obviously that wasn't easy for him. He was. They had the favourite team though. They thought they would win it with the massive team they had in '95 and never won it. So I learned a lot of lessons from him as a rugby coach. I think when I look back, Nelson Mandela. Everyone uses his name, and I suppose in a lot of ways that's because of who he is. But for me, also, being in contact with him and chatting to him, he played a massive role in getting me to understand about humility and understanding of forgiveness and all the things that maybe aren't rugby related, but also just give you that perspective of what it's really like by meeting a guy like him. So, there have been a lot of guys along the way, and I think you're right, Jason. I think that's the secret, is getting people around you that stimulate you, that bring out the best in you. And I must say, the one thing that I'm really enjoying about Australia is that this is a a sporting nation, and rugby is not their national game, but they're Olympic athletes. They've got the Olympics coming up now, and the interaction I have with swimming coaches, with athletic coaches, with wrestling coaches, with AFL, rugby league. I mean, it's unbelievable to see the knowledge and the intellectual property that they share here. I mean, it's there's no doubt that there's a secret to why they're successful in sport is because they're not scared to show and discuss things that work for them. And that I've no doubt that come 4 years time from now, when I'm finished coaching in Australia, I'm going to be a much better coach from the lessons I'm learning in Australia now. They're a lot more detailed, yeah. And it's because of the way the kids grow up. They won't just do things for the sake of doing them. They'll want to know why they're doing them, and they'll need to explain to them what the reasoning and the rationale behind it is. I think the other thing about them is, they don't just always only do it on passion. I think there's a thought that the Aussies have a sort of saying where they say they'll have a crack and they'll have a go, and that's true. They really do have a full go at it. But one thing about them is they don't just all play on emotion. They think about what they're doing as well, and then they have a good feeling for what they're trying to achieve on the field. So when you say, I mean, those would probably be the two things that I think that I would bring back is just the detail. Not that we weren't detailed in South Africa, but even the sort of finicky things that are really detailed as well. I think that the sharing in terms of the intellectual property, I think that's another thing that I think I would get better at. And then lastly is just, I think that's just the thought that goes into the game. I think that there's a lot more, they can't bash people. They don't have the players that sort of can bash people in this physical game. They've got to work out ways in which they can maybe be a little bit more clever or a little bit more streetwise or a little bit more subtle in things that they're doing. And with that comes, a different mindset for the way you prepare. So there's a lot more planning and detail that goes into pre-game and sort of match day and analysis that I suppose we were used to in South Africa. I'm very thankful that I've had that chance. And would I have changed it? No. Would I have liked those things to have changed? Yes. I still think that for South Africa to be number one in the world consistently, there's going to have to be a long look at the way they do things. And I speak now as a chap living miles away. There's no doubt that the whole world knows that if South Africa ever got it right and got those things that maybe don't assist in getting them to be number one, they will consistently be number one. And I think the world's scared of that because they know that that's the one thing that South Africa probably shoot themselves in the foot is by the way that within the internal or the way they run things or the way the motions and things that go in the rugby game, they probably at times they're their worst enemies. Doc Craven was a legend in our country, and I remember someone telling me a story once that they were standing next to Doc Craven, and they asked Doc made a statement like he was at Stellenbosch at Kutsenberg watching a boys play, and he said, "That boy over there will be a Springbok." And the chap asked him, "Doc, how do you know that? How do you know that guy's going to be a Springbok? There's 1,000 boys on the field, and you've earmarked that one kid. What is it, And Doc always said, that if you're the biggest or the strongest or the quickest or the most skillful or the tallest or whatever, the chances are you'd become a Springbok. And I know it sounds like a very basic thing, but that's probably what I look for. I look for something that's just a bit unique and that can do something that other players can't do on the field. And that, I suppose, is the place that I start off when I look at the game. I look for something that other players don't necessarily see or necessarily can do or can't do either. That they sort of, it's a skill or it's something in the game that maybe someone else doesn't notice. And it doesn't always mean kicking the ball the furthest. It just means sometimes the way that he runs into position or the time that he has when he has the ball in his hands or the decision he makes when he's in the corner or whatever. And I think that I've been very blessed in that. As you say, I've been lucky enough to spot that, and those boys they've all gone on to play many times or they've done really well in rugby. And as I said, I enjoy that part of the game. I enjoy going and seeing someone that maybe someone else hasn't noticed, and then you change his life. And part of it is not just spotting him; it's about how you then develop him mentally, emotionally. What do you do to him? How you build him up. What situations do you play him in? Which games do you play him in? Who do you play him against? I mean, that's also part of when you do spot a guy. How then do you get him to actually get through get through the system or get through wherever he's got to get through to get to the top. I just get such a thrill out of the fact that I just sometimes say to myself, I don't believe people haven't seen what I've just seen, and then I think that part of the coaching thing that I enjoy then is then spending time with him to get him to repeat those things that happen naturally to him, and then putting him in a team where when he does those things, he just gets so much self-belief out of the fact that not only does the team do well, the players around him are just so thankful that that sort of skill set that he brings is the one they need for the game. So, yeah, I mean, again, I've just been very thankful. I looked again at the Boks side the other day. I see Pierce Spies is on the brink of playing his 50th test. And if you consider, I mean, I think it's almost 15 out of 15 that played in the World Cup final have gone on to play 50 or more tests for South Africa. I mean, it's fantastic to know that, those boys started as first caps, a lot of them first caps or second caps or relatively new caps when they joined the Boks setup. And all of them have gone on to play over 50, some of them over 100. So that's when you get a thrill as a coach, is being able to identify them, put them in a system, and watch them stay in a system and become the best in the world. So it's not for me to say, I think if I had that team, we would have won the World Cup again. I think that would be arrogant of me to say that, Jason. But how did it feel? I mean, I must be honest, there were times that I sort of struggled to watch it because I had put a lot of time into that team, and there were times that I sort of, as I said, I felt a little bit heart sore because if I had it over, maybe I would have stuck it out and try to have another term in the Springbok setup. But as I said, things have, there's a healing process. I've now got another challenge, and I'm enjoying the Brumbies. But there were times, if I'm really honest with you, there were times that I thought, gee, maybe I should have stayed on, and who knows, maybe we could have been a team that wouldn't back-to-back World Cups. But one never knows those things, and it's easy to look back on hindsight and say, yes, but, or yes, could have, or should have. Again, just like I use Eddie on the rugby field and just like I use John Hart, I also listen and discuss things with top corporate people who run companies, and I ask them about things like how do you handle staff or how do you measure performance I think that then you also use whatever you can and you develop your own sort of leadership style. And, it's worked for me. I think running a rugby team, you've got to sort of be a bit of a leader in that you know exactly which way the ship's going to go. You've got to then make sure that you're the captain of that ship. You've got to make everyone feel inclusive. You've got to make sure that everyone that's part of it feels as though that they're getting recognition as well. I think the two things people enjoy is recognition and love, and those are things that are important as well in terms of being a leader. I met a guy called Pat Riley there who's revered in America as a real basketball leader and a basketball coach, and spoke to me a lot about how he handles guys like Shaq O'Neal and Michael Jordan and players like that. So yeah, I've made a sort of point of spending a bit of time with people who run not only business but other big sporting organizations and look after big name players and find out what is it that makes them get the best out of those athletes and whatever lessons they give. Obviously don't use them all, but because they're probably not relevant at times to rugby, but they're obviously lessons that they do give me and shown me or shared with me that I use as a coach in a rugby environment. I suppose the one lesson that but the one sort of phrase that I'll never forget is that there's a book, The Art of War, by a guy called Sun Tzu, who basically, there was a quote in there that said, if you react to your opposition, you're in a position of weakness, and if he reacts to you, you're in a position of strength. And I think that that's something that I sort of always think about when we're delivering teams and picking teams, is that if you start changing your team for who you're playing against, or you change the way you play for who you're playing against, or you start worrying about what you should be doing in order to beat the opposition, as opposed to them worrying about what they should be doing to beat you, then you're in a position of weakness. So that comes down to the way you manage your team, the way you select it, the way you approach the game, the way you prepare, the way you train, what you say to them, what you show them before the game. And so that has a domino effect on all those things as well, Jason. So, there's not, as I said, not one person, but a thing like that is obviously big in the way that I do things, because I believe that you've always got to be in a position of strength where you can control the things that you can control. And that shows confidence. And I think that shows players that if you've got confidence and you've got, the sort of if they sense that you're not all over the place and that you've got direction, then they get a lot of security and direction out of that as well. So yeah, I mean that for me, just as I said, in every decision you make about who you're picking, how you're going to play, why you're going to play like that, what you're going to do before the game, all those things have a stabilizing effect on your group of players, and that's what you're going to try and get to every week, is that they feel comfortable about going into a rugby situation, because whether we like it or not, it's like a war. It's like two teams plotting against each other, and you've got to go in a position of strength every time. So there's a book that's called Bounce, which was a story about a table tennis player who became a champion, and he played in the garage. His parents bought him a table tennis table, and he had to play in a garage. It was smaller than, so he had to play close to the table, which ended up his skill set became much better than it did had he played in a big garage where he could run backwards and actually have more time to play the ball. His eye-hand coordination. So that was a book where I just, again, realized the kind of training you do for a player and the environment you try and create is also important, because it has an effect on the outcome that you get of your athlete. Good to Great's a good book. Outliers, it's a story about young boys who are older in their age groups and they just dominate. They get the best coaching from a young group, and because they get better coaching, they become better players, and because they become better players, they always stay in the A teams. And it's quite interesting that boys who are born in the first 6 months of the year generally are the ones who are the better sports people, because they're 6 months older than their peers. So again, those are the ones that come to mind. There are obviously other, books that I've read, whether it's Rod McQueen's book or whether it's Clive Woodward's book or whether it's, Martin Johnson's book. I've read Lance Armstrong's book. It's not about the bike, and I think that again, it's all those stories that have happened to those top guys that I take little pieces out of and try and, as I said, use them in the teams that I coach, and maybe use those scenarios and those examples to bring out the best in the players that I have. But those are lessons, as I said. Bounce, the little boy who had to play in a confined area, and the skill set he had to develop obviously made him the best. And that goes true to the way that you create an environment for the players in your group. So the way we train definitely has an effect on how you get an outcome of your group when they play at a higher level. There's one thing that I learned in Australia again, and many things I have, but that's the one thing that's again reaffirmed in my life, is that the way they train here, they can't afford not to train harder than anybody, because they have less players. As I said, they compete with all the other sporting codes. They only have a small talent pool, so they've got to spend a lot of time on training and repeating things that maybe we take for granted. So I have no doubt that 10,000 hour rule is exactly that. But I suppose the challenge of a coach is how you put those 10,000 hours into play. It's is it monotonous and doing it over and over? And I think in the old days that the people would have believed that the only way you're going to do it is by doing that skill. I suppose with technology now and with sports science the way it is now, there are other ways in which you can spend those 10,000 hours and develop a better athlete. And the things that I think about, Jason, we have a program that we use with the Boks called iGym, which is you can play on your computer and improve your eye skills, which means your depth perception and your peripheral vision improve, which means your skills can improve on the field because your vision gets so much better. Now, I mean, again, that's part of the 10,000 hours. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I'm one of those old school coaches who believes the more time you spend on that activity and the more, one of the phrases I have in my coaching book is repetition, repetition, repetition. And the reason for that is the more times you're in that situation, the better you'll actually be able to do it in the game situation. So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely the way to go. Is there's no shortcuts for hard work. I mean, I have met 18-year-old boys, and I've got boys 16 and 20. So, I mean, the advice I give them, I suppose, is that they must, two things people don't enjoy is spoiled kids and bullies. And, I suppose if anyone ever bumped into them and said, "What did your dad always say to you?" They would say, "Your dad doesn't like bullies and spoiled kids," because the reality is those are two traits that no one enjoys, and that would be the advice that I'd continue to tell them. Is just remember, that those are things that around the world, doesn't matter where you are, people don't warm to those sort of attributes. I probably wouldn't have said that to you a few years ago. I would have said it's here to make sure we do our best we can. But I suppose at the end of the day, it's about getting to heaven. It's about how we live our lives here to make sure that, that there's an eternal life. So yeah, again, I think that it doesn't matter what you do and what field you're in, that's probably the things you got to focus on the most. And then when you do that, everything else falls into place. I think that one of the things that hit home after the World Cup is that one can, in the world of rugby, tend to become bulletproof, or tend to think you're bigger than you are, or you should be, or could be. And I suppose all that does, it just reflected a little bit, or hit home to me after that at the end of the day, it's not about what you've done, or what you think you've done. It's about how you live your life. And I suppose a message from a South African to South Africans is that one has to just try and be positive all the time. I think that the easiest thing is to become negative, and the easiest thing is to find fault. I suppose the hardest thing is to go through every day just trying to be a better guy and make sure everyone's positive. So, but my immediate thing is I'm happy in Australia. I've committed myself to the Brumbies. I've committed myself to getting this franchise back on track and getting them to be the best in not only in Australia but in the competition. Where does it hold for me? I have no idea, because as I said to you, you would have said to me 5 years ago, or even at the World Cup in 2007, that your next coaching job would be in Australia coaching the Brumbies. I mean, I would have said you're kidding me. So, I'm not sure where I'll be in the next couple of years after I'm finished my job here, but I do have aspirations of coaching at international level again. I know that in 4 years' time I will be a much better coach than I am now, purely by the life lessons I'm learning from miles away from South Africa, out of my comfort zone, coaching in another environment where rugby is not the number one sport, in a different culture. So, I would like to get back and coach again, and I'd like to win another World Cup. I think that, I had a dream that I wanted to win one. I have a dream now that I'd like to win 2 World Cups. So, I'm not sure where it's going to be. I'm not sure which team it's going to be. Who knows? But, I obviously I'm young enough to coach at least another 2-3 World Cups, and I'm hoping that I'll have another crack at winning another one. So, I'm not sure where, but I'm sure that wherever I'm meant to be, I will be. But it's been fantastic. Heineke has waited a long time to coach the team. He's had his name on the shortlist and has been on the shortlist for probably 3 coaches. So from Rudolph, myself, and Peter, he's basically been there and thereabouts. So, I'm sure that he was dying to have a shot at it, and he's done well at it. I mean, he's won at it, and now he's unbeaten as the coach. So I think things are all healthy in South African rugby. I think that, as I said to you earlier as well, Jace, there's no doubt that from outside looking in, it doesn't seem as though all the interference or all the sort of things that other coaches had to endure are probably as prevalent as they are now, and maybe that's a good thing, because maybe that's allowing this new generation of player, new generation of coach, and the new generation of Springboks to actually have a full crack at becoming the best in the world again. And I suppose that's what all coaches and all people involved in Springbok rugby and people who've been involved in Springbok rugby really want to see at the end of the day. So, yeah, I mean, it's I'm miles away, but it's always nice to watch the Boks play, and always nice now to watch the Boks winning and being successful. Yeah, I don't know if I have a favorite. I've got plenty of stories. I suppose the one that I always tell about, which is a true story that happened, because a lot of people have got, they've obviously got stories that get told, and people are not sure if they ever happened, But the one story that, and it's not a really massive story, but the one thing that I sort of got great pleasure out of in the time that I was the coach was, remember young Skalkberger in the change room once, and he was at the peak of his career in my first year. He won the Player of the Year that year as the best player in the world. So, and I remember it was in the first year. I remember sitting next to him and asking him about Oosterrand, and I just said to him, "What do you think?" Because at that stage, also, he'd been around a long time, and I'd brought him back from retirement, and that obviously a lot of speculation in the media about whether he was past it, etc., etc. And I remember Skalk saying to me, he said to me, I'm so glad that he warms up in our change room and not in their change room, because he's a meneer, And I remember after the game getting him to tell that story to us, because I just couldn't believe, sometimes we take things for granted about how those senior players and what they mean. That's the story I was telling you just now, Jace, about walking through the front door when you finish and not running out the back door, and one of the things I sort of try to do in the time, and I'm using the story about Os, is I let him play his last game at Newlands before we left, and I told the crowd that's the last time he played in South Africa. His last game was a World Cup final, which again is a great attribute for him to leave as a 36-year-old playing 80 minutes in the World Cup final. And, as I said, I think that story that I sort of relate to that about Os being in the side and what he meant to the boys is unique, because the gist of the story goes, Jason, that when we ran out for the World Cup final, I could sense that in that last 5 minutes before we ran out, before the kickoff, I think it hit home to everybody about what Os had achieved. We always speak about winning a World Cup. We speak about he won it in 95, but I think that those other 21 players who were in the change room for the first time realized what he had achieved and what a meneer he actually was in the Springbok setup, because for that split second, they realized they were 80 minutes away from achieving something that he had achieved literally, 15 years before that, so 12 years before that. So, as I said, I think that those are stories that I think about. Is having Skulk saying, I'm so glad he's here, he's a meneer. But he said it, I don't think it hit home to him until literally 5 minutes before the kickoff in 2007, when he realized what a meneer he actually was. And I think those are the stories that make teams special, is when you have those sort of bonds and that sort of feeling in amongst the team about what certain players have achieved. Yeah, look, I mean, I suppose there are a few, and they, because of the significance of the time that they were given, and the three that I sort of think about. One is the very first team talk I ever gave was almost identical to the talk I gave them before the World Cup final, and was about being brave. And it was about a story about a young guy who was in the army and had to stay at his post and basically protect his post, even though he knew he was going to die, And I said to them about being brave and playing and never leaving anything out on the field, making sure that if you think you're scared, just to understand about young 18-year-old boys who've died, knowing that they had no other option, And as I said, the theme of that story, both on the first test I ever played, because I was scared, and I'm sure they were all scared about what the expectation was and what was going to happen in the first test, and again, losing everything in 80 minutes of the World Cup final was something that I had to then, and it's just, for some of them, I don't know if they ever remembered the first speech, but I'm sure that the message would have hit home, is about just being brave, about understanding that you're going to make mistakes, but be brave enough to make them in a World Cup final, because that will be the difference between winning and losing. I don't want you to put your head in the hole and think that it's all going to go away. You've got to lift your head, and if they shoot you, they shoot you, but you got to be brave, So that was the sort of thing that my first and almost my last game, because we only had one test after that. And then I suppose the other thing that I think about is I never really ever lost it with the players. I never really ever had to shout and scream and belittle them and that sort of thing. It wasn't my style, but there was a game in Perth where a couple of boys were busy wetting their hair at half-time and were more worried about what they were looking like. And I lost it a bit in terms of getting them to understand that it's not about, whether they look all right, it's about how they play. And we ended up winning that game. So a lot of the boys came to me afterwards and said, they weren't always the boys who were in the mirror, but a lot of the boys said, gee, you're upset, and you made a massive statement. And as I said, we won that game. So, those three team talks for me are probably ones that I remember because of the significance of what actually happened in those games.
Okay. Jake, thank you very much. That was awesome. You've given me so much of your time. You've given us so much insight and wisdom and inspiration. I really can't express how grateful I am.
No, it's a pleasure, Jason.
Jake, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, my friend. Okay, no, look after yourself and stay in touch, eh?
Thank you. Good luck with the rest of your conference. We'll be shouting for your boys back all the way back from South Africa here.
Thank you, Jace. Cheers, boy. Cheers, eh?
Bye.